Oh, broadcast is live. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, hello. This is a very special edition of Debate Cafe because we are, in fact, actually in the same room. We do actually know each other. And so we might have a connection issue. If that's true, we will just pre-record this, but it seems to let us know in the chat. But if we have to stop the show, we'll have the show up pretty soon after this. So yeah, today we're going to be debating slavery again. Does the Bible support slavery? And we have Nadir back, and we have Praise has not debated this topic on the channel yet, but both of you guys have won your previous debates, so this will be
it's gonna be great, and good luck.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you.
starting off with
All right.
yeah.
Shall I start? Yeah, I'm going to assume that means go because they're a little bit laggy.
So we have
yeah. Okay, I'm going to go and start. So, okay, thank you, Thomas, for joining in this debate.
Okay.
So last week, we talked with another person who tried to present a defense of the Bible, and I will be addressing that. So what is most important over here, when it comes to the topic of slavery in the Bible, is the clear permission to be a slave. Let me share my desktop over here. Here we can see a picture of a slave master mercilessly whipping his slave. Now, as a Christian, you must take the side of the slave master. The Bible in both the Old Testament and the New Testament gives him full permission to whip this slave mercilessly, and that's found in many passages in the Bible. So let's look at the first one. If you go to Exodus, it says over here, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. Now, that's actually a very good teaching. But let's keep reading. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two. So that's where the problem is. So there's two problems here. Number one, he has a permission to beat him to death if he survives a day or two, and he has a permission to whip him. As you can see from the text over there, there's no punishment for doing that. Now, to prevent any kind of reinterpretation spin by the Christians, I have here 6 commentaries on the Bible, all stating the exact same thing as far as what this meaning of the verse is, which is, as they all state over here, loss of your slave was enough punishment for the master. Okay? And so when you beat a slave like that, just the mere mention of beating a slave like that, that opens up the door for his torture as well. So as we can see, the Bible clearly gives sanctions, beating the slave to death over here. And these are 6 commentaries of the Bible that I'm showing on your screen, all stating the same thing. No, the slave master is not to be punished if he does this heinous action. However, look at what Prophet Muhammad says about this topic. And this is where Islam takes the side of the slave. Christianity takes the side of the slave master. The Prophet Muhammad said, just reading this hadith very quickly, it says over here, the person, he was beating his servant, and I heard a voice behind me saying, Abu Masud, bear in mind that Allah has more dominance over you than you upon him. I turned and found him to be Allah's messenger. I said, Allah's messenger, I set him free for the sake of Allah. Thereafter, he said, had you not done that, the gates of hell would have been opened up for you, or the fire would have burnt you. So Islam gives a very clear message right here that you beat your slave, you are going to burn in hell. And that's what's missing from the Bible. The Bible takes the other side where it says you have the right to beat your slave. So, these are, of course, very embarrassing passages for the Christians. The only defense, as we saw from last week, is the reinterpretation spin. They will try to reinterpret these passages. And, like, for example, they will say really absurd things like, well, in the Bible, there's no evidence that the slavery is involuntary. You see, people were imposing their understanding of slavery, but the Bible really didn't mean the really bad version of slavery. They will say absurd things like slavery in the Bible is like this employer-employee relationship. So let's entertain all of that for tonight's debate, which I didn't do with Frank. Let's go along with the canard, even though we can see that is absurd, ridiculous. So one argument can blow away all this reinterpretation spin if we were to entertain it. And that is, well, whose fault is that? You see that? If the early Christians began whipping their slaves and engaging in this type of brutality, whose fault is that? So let's see what the first fallacy here is. The reinterpretation spin involves not one, but two interpretation spins. The first interpretation is, oh, that's not what the Bible meant, which is what Thomas is going to say. But the second interpretation spin, which he needs, is that he has to say the blame is on the early Christians in the 18th century, 17th century who did that. The blame is upon them. That second spin, interpretation spin, will not work. It will fail. If we were to go along with the canard, it's the Bible which is at fault for what happened. Okay? So let's give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. Okay? You see, what is the Bible? The Bible lists a set of instructions, detailed instructions. And all the white man was doing was following the instructions. Okay? He did it if the instructions doesn't explicitly say, oh no, the slavery in the New Testament is only voluntary slavery. If it doesn't explicitly state that, then the white man is not at fault. Okay? He's not at fault here. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In fact, I'll end my share over here. This is a very common case the type of explanations that the Christians give to defend the Bible. This scam has been used in court systems and they all fail. What you are trying to do is you are trying to shout fire in a crowded movie theater. If you shout fire in a crowded movie theater and then people panic and escape and some people get trampled to death, they say, hey, why did you do that? Oh, that's not what I meant. I meant fire. You see, I was lighting a cigarette. Look, fire. Will this explanation work? It will not work. Why? Because the general public has this understanding of what fire means in a movie theater. When you yell fire in a movie theater, don't tell me what your intention was. What is important here is what the general public understands by that meaning. So when you say beat a slave, you could beat a slave and slavery is wonderful and all these things that we're going to find in the Bible, don't tell me the argument, oh, but this is not what the intent of the Bible's authors were. That won't work. So what the fallacy here is, you want to yell fire. You want to yell slavery in a crowded movie theater. It is just as wrong as to yell fire in a movie theater as it is slavery. We don't care about what your true intentions are. Why the Bible is to blame for the catastrophe which took place in history is because it did not provide clear instructions for the general public to follow. When the general public read these verses, they are going to understand it one way. That is why Thomas's reinterpretation spins will not work, telling us, but the burden of proof is upon you to produce that this is really talking about involuntary slavery. No, that will not work. Even let us go along and say, okay, fine, the Bible is talking about a different version of slavery. The Bible is still at fault for the catastrophe which took place in history. Why? The instructions are not clear enough. When you give those instructions to the general public, there's no way you're going to find out that the New Testament is really talking about only a voluntary, kindly, loving type of slavery. It's just, there's no way the general public is going to come to that understanding. So that is why you just need to come clean tonight and accept the reality that the Bible is endorsing not just slavery, but a horrific beating of slaves to death, and the same type of horrific images. The Bible fully endorses that. Okay. So if you say tonight, but you are imposing your understanding of slavery onto the Bible, yes. If I'm not doing that, the Bible is a book which is good for nothing. Look, I will prove to you Thomas is imposing his understanding onto the Bible as well. Look, prove to me, Thomas, that when it talks about marriage in the Bible, it's talking about a woman's consent, that a woman's consent is necessary. Show me that in the Bible. You will not be able to do so. You know why? Because you are imposing your understanding onto the Bible of what marriage is. Yes, a woman has to give consent. That's why you cannot barge into the doors of Kim Kardashian and say, you are going to marry me. I don't care what you have to say. Now, back in the old days, they could do that. There was arranged marriages. Prove to me in the Bible where a woman's consent is necessary for marriage. You will never be able to do that. Why? Because Thomas, as well as all Christians, we impose our understanding onto the Bible of not just what marriage is, but life, divorce, happiness, war, peace, whatever. We impose our understanding onto the Bible. And if we can't do that, then the book is useless. I mean, it cannot speak to our reality. So yes, I will impose my understanding onto the Bible of what slavery is, unless the Bible explicitly tells me, oh, I have a different version of slavery. So that should deal, number one, with a false argument that, oh, Nadir is just imposing his understanding of slavery. That won't work tonight. Oh, but the real interpretation of slavery is something else. That won't work. All right, go ahead, Thomas. I think my time's up, right?
Okay, so that's 10 minutes.
All right. Appreciate that, Nadir. Can I share my screen? Is that too much internet, for you guys? Can your internet bear that, or?
You're in the cloud, so you're okay, Thomas.
I'm in the clouds?
Yeah. StreamYard
We'll
goes in the
see.
cloud.
Oh. Well, let me try to share my my thing here and see if you guys see it. Do you guys see that? Oh, good. Yes, it's sweet. It's there. I was worried about that. I appreciate that. Let's see here. View.
Yeah.
Because last time I did this, it was hard to get it up there. All right. So let me see if that's on the screen. Okay. So I'll just say now, and then you guys can start the timer, and we'll get going here. I'm excited about this. So go ahead now. Does the Bible support slavery? Hell no, not even no, hell no. And this is a quick overview of the biblical socioeconomic system that I hope Nadir gets into a little bit. I hope that he gets familiar with this. So bulletin point number one, Israelites and non-Israelites were under one law, Numbers 15 through 30. So it's impossible to charge Israelites of mistreating non-Israelites, especially when God commanded Israel to love and not oppress aliens. Exodus 22:21, Exodus 23:9, Deuteronomy 24:14, Leviticus 19:34. The biblical socio-economic system was instituted to prevent poverty of both Israelites and non-Israelites by providing debt relief. Deuteronomy 24:14, Leviticus 25:35. This is debt slavery, indentured servitude, Nadir. This is not chattel slavery. If chattel slavery was such a thing in the scriptures, there would have been owners, Baals. This is what you have to get familiar with the ancient Near East scholarship. This is what the best way to put this, like the dynamic between masters and owners. There are no Adones that were slaves. Slave masters were Baals because chattel livestock, for example, would be returned back to their owner. This would be, you can check this out for yourself, Exodus 21, 29, and 34. While escaped of beds were not to be returned back to their masters, as Deuteronomy 25 stipulates. The Israelites and surrounding nations were involved in a suzerain vassal treaty throughout the region, which makes it impossible for there to be chattel slavery and POWs. Both had contractual agreements due to specific jobs like military support and tribute. For example, Joshua 9, 3 through 27, Judges, etc. For example, God punished the Hebrew nation for their breach of the suzerainty treaty, 2 Samuel 21, 1. And the king of Israel was required to compensate the Gibeonites for their loss, 2 Samuel 21, 2 through 9. This demonstrates that the Hebrew suzerainty treaty placed a higher order of obligation on the suzerain, in this case Israel, than it did in the vassal in the case of the Gibeonites, a situation unique in the A&E. The biblical ethos of loving foreigners debunks slavery. Yahweh desired for Hebrews to love and help aliens as one of their own. Moreover, they were not to treat aliens impartially because they were aliens in Egypt. This is plainly stated in Leviticus 25, 35 through 37, Exodus 12, 48, Leviticus 19, 34 through 35, Deuteronomy 10, 18 through 19. Yahweh desired for Hebrews to not enslave aliens because they were also slaves in Egypt. Exodus 22, 21, Exodus 23, 9, Leviticus 19, 33 through 34, Leviticus 25, 42, 45, Deuteronomy 24, 14. Yahweh curses those who withhold justice from aliens. Deuteronomy 27, 19. Mistreating aliens was equated with mistreating orphans and widows. Ezekiel 22, 7. Yahweh equates enslaving aliens with shedding innocent blood and idolatry. Jeremiah 7, 6. Come on, Nadir. You have unfortunately, you have a misunderstood viewpoint of the Old Testament. So, whoops, I lost my thing there. Here we go. So, prominent A&E scholars give consensus on slavery in the A&E. So at the outset of the seminar, the participants agreed that no essential form of Near Eastern or Oriental slavery exists, nor any such universal definition capable of unifying the disparate and gradational realities of enslaved people in the Near Eastern society. This is Laura Culbertson. Oriental the seminar. These are the highest of the high, the cream of the crop when it comes to ancient Near East scholars, and Nadir's going to tell us there's prescribed slavery in the Bible? And then here's another excerpt from this paper that was a consensus. Thus, one result of the Oriental Institute seminar is a consensus that scholars should dispense with the slave-free dichotomy. Perhaps there is any meaningful dichotomy to the society involves household affiliation versus no household affiliation. While many non-slave persons could lack a household attachment, slaves are one social group that always, and by definition, attached to a household or institution. And you can read this from Slaves and Households in the Ancient Near East. So we even have consensuses from real scholars that know what's going on back then. I don't think Nadir does. It's okay, though. We can educate them right now. So the expert's definition of slavery, let's see if Nadir fulfills the criterion of the expert's definition of a slave. So what is a slave by a historian? So when we watch Nadir tonight, see if he can demonstrate there was real slavery, he's going to have to fulfill this criteria. A chattel slave is property. The slave owner's rights over his slave property were total, covering the person as well as the labor of the slave. The slave was kinless, stripped of his or her social identity in the process of the capture, sale, and deracination, and deny the capacity to forge new bonds and kinship through marriage alliance. These are the three basic components of chattel slavery. This is Peter Garnsney, Cambridge World History of Slavery. So let's see you fulfill that criteria. So the practice of chattel slavery is punishable by death. Chattel slavery is impossible because Exodus 21:16 explicitly outlaws all human trafficking. Accomplished PhD Hebrew scholar Douglas Stewart points out the transliteration of the word man with the specific mark there, the S with the little triangle at the top of it, used in this verse indicates all kidnapping without regard to class, gender, status, or age. This verse should be translated, whoever steals a person, whether he sells them or found in possession of him, must be put to death. The source is the New American Commentary, Volume 2, Exodus, Douglas Stewart. Trafficking livestock as property in the very next chapter, in Exodus 22, states that the punishment is double recompense, not the death penalty as recorded in Exodus 21. Hence, demonstrating people are not viewed as chattel. Moreover, Baal's owners in the KJV are chattel owners, not Adones, because a Baal's chattel, such as the ox, would be returned back to their owner, stipulated in Exodus 21:29. We already went through that. However, an escaped bed would not be returned back to their Adon master, as written in Deuteronomy 25:15. And I just wanted to show you in the Hebrew, there it is. There's the specific mark right up here. You guys can see that hopefully on the screen. And busting misconceptions about biblical slavery. For there to be biblical slavery, the supposed 613 laws of the Pentateuch would have to be shown to be legislative prescriptive. However, the mainstream view by scholars is that only the Decalogue was legislative or prescriptive. This is because only the 10 Commandments are apodetic or prescriptive, while the other laws are casuistic, descriptive in nature. Since only the 10 Commandments are prescriptive, then atheists and skeptics cannot pin any notions of slavery in the biblical God. It is inherently impossible because even the context of the linguistic context within it written would even permit it to even be possible. So contrary to what atheists peddle about the 10 Commandments not prohibiting slavery, the 10 Commandments do outright outlaw slavery. The 10th Commandment, which is thou shalt not covet, is very specific because it particularly prohibits coveting any chattel. The Hebrew word for covet, chamad, is used in regards to humans and other physical objects. Deuteronomy 7:25, Proverbs 6:25. The word forever, used in Leviticus 25:46, is misapplied because it is used anachronistically by those who proclaim biblical slavery. The word forever, olam, means by mainstream and A&E scholar, means to the jubilee or the master's death. Moreover, how could Leviticus 25:44 through 46 be equated with slavery anyway? Because the Lord himself is called property and inherited in Ezekiel 44:28. And if that's the time, I'll go ahead and yield to my opponent.
Okay, so I guess we're going to do 2 minutes back and forth.
And that is 10 minutes.
Awesome.
Shall we do 2 minutes back and forth?
Yeah, I thought you had 2 minutes, right? Back and forth? Or cross-exam, right? 2 minutes cross-exam.
Yeah, and
Yeah. Okay, so let me go ahead and start my 2 minutes.
sorry about we're having delays, but
Okay.
yeah, we'll do 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes back and forth. So the problem here is, Thomas, you really wasted all your time up there. You're trying to show the real interpretation of the Bible. That's not going to work tonight. I've already explained to you why that's not going to work. Let's go along with all of it. I just told you. Let's go along with everything you're saying here. Aliens don't oppress them really means slaves. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. But let's go along with it. The debt relief, that's the type of slavery the Bible's talking about. Debt relief. Yes. Okay. Well, that's fine. Yeah. Thou shalt not covet. That's what it's really talking about. You see, all you're doing is reinterpreting verses to make it mean what you want it to mean.
Is this a cross-exam or is this a rebuttal?
It's 2 minutes back and forth. So I'll go for 2 minutes and you'll go for 2 minutes.
So what's your question?
I'm getting to it. I'm not done with my 2 minutes. So my point here, and I got 1 more minute left. So let's go along with all this. But what my argument to you here is, the first argument, the Bible, in light of, let's take everything you are saying in as just on face value. We'll accept whatever you're saying. The Bible is to blame for the catastrophe which took place, in the 18th century, 17th century, because the instructions are just not clear enough for the common man, for the public, to really read the Bible and come to the understandings which you are. There, he did the best he could reading the instructions which he read. So where what you need to where the answer where see the problem is with your presentation, you had to jump through a lot of loops, get into the meaning of the word with a triangle on top of it. Sorry, the general public in the 18th century are not going to do all of this reinterpretation scam which you are doing, which we'll just accept. Okay, and so that's where I think you are missing the point, that the reason why the Bible is to blame for chattel slavery, it just didn't provide good enough instructions, and we rightfully imposed our understanding of what slavery was onto the Bible. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my answer to this is you're trying to do is weaponize people's ignorance as an argument against the integrity of the Bible. So what you're doing is exhibiting a heavy ethnocentric and a bigoted viewpoint. At very best, Nadir, this is a genetic fallacy. This is fallacious argumentation. We have, just like in science, like if we're going to try to get into the technicalities of science, even if they're big words and people don't understand it, it's still, that doesn't mean that's like science is going to be eroded away somehow. So please give us something better than just whining and crying and whimpering. It doesn't mean anything.
Okay, so going back to my point, yes. So we can all, okay, so you're saying I'm just whimpering, bigoted viewpoint. No, we are imposing our understanding of slavery onto the Bible, which is what's going to happen, irregardless if it's right or wrong. That's what's going to happen. So when you tell me slavery, Nadir, Ahmed, this is slavery in the Bible, when the Bible says you could beat your slave and things like that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my bigoted viewpoint and I'm going to impose it on the Bible, just like when the Bible talks about marriage. I'm going to assume it's talking about a woman having consent. Now, does the Bible really teach? Is there really a verse in the Bible which says a woman's consent is needed for marriage? No, there's not. But I will impose my bigoted viewpoint onto the Bible, because when the Bible talks about love, war, peace, slavery, whatever the life situations, we impose our understanding onto the Bible so that we can understand it, and we can see that this book is relevant for our times. So that's exactly what the early Christians did, and that's exactly, like, for example, all the reinterpretation spin which you have presented to us, this stuff doesn't hit the radar screen till like 40, 50 years ago. If you look like in the 18th century, like, what? You will never find any trace of history of people understanding the Bible the way you are understanding it. Why? Because the plain reading of the text doesn't yield that understanding. For example, there is no verse in the New Testament which says the slavery is only voluntary, explicitly stated like that. There is no verse in the New Testament which says which says that you cannot ever beat your slave mercilessly. There is nothing like that. So in my remaining 30, so that is why the Bible is to blame for the horrific catastrophe which took place, if we were to assume what you are saying is true, because it really didn't produce good, clear instructions like Prophet Muhammad did. Remember, Muhammad said, if you beat a slave, you're going to burn in hell. That's the kind of instructions we are looking for, and that's not what we find in the Bible. Okay, so all that interpretation spin, though it is interesting, I'm not going to sit here and challenge you with it, but let's face it, guy in the 18th century, he's not going to, he's no way even going to
clear. A question in this?
Understand
like,
that.
I'm still waiting for a question. Like,
yeah, so that's my 2 minutes. I've just
Okay.
shown you how the Bible is to blame for what took place, and irregardless of whatever you think is the real intent is. So there's my 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so, I mean, should science be blamed because Robert Oppenheimer made the atom bomb? Does that mean that science is immoral, or does that mean that we should abandon science and look at it in a negative way because Robert Oppenheimer made the atom bomb? Your argument is irrelevant. It has nothing due to the credence or the authenticity of the source itself. And yes, you do have to properly interpret these texts. And the Hebrews understood what casuistic law was. And that was the syntactical force was they understood that was in the subjunctive mood of the protasis, when they knew it was not unconditional. These were conditional laws, hypothetical laws. So even within the passages itself, it denotes volition, because the word conditional indicates that these are conditional sentences that the Hebrews understood. So that your arguments and what you're trying to bring forth is out of ignorance. You don't even know what the hell you're talking about, because if you knew what casuistic law was, you would understand that it was the conditional part of it was already inside the verse. It was patently already inside of it. So the Hebrews understood that. The only thing that they knew was not unconditional was the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue. And so you would have to show how these laws, of these supposed quote slavery passages or laws, would have to be in apodictic form, but they're not. They're in casuistic form, which are conditional. Since they are conditional, then they already understood that the woman they would have volition already. They would already understood that. So your objection is moot, nullified, so debunked. There you go. Go to the next one now.
Okay, so going back to your, claim about is science to blame for the atom bomb, well, that's a false analogy, because the problem we're dealing with here is the Bible said slavery. It yelled slavery into a crowded theater. Yelling slavery into a crowded theater is just as wrong as yelling fire in a crowded theater. Why? Because we have our understanding of what slavery is. We have our understanding what fire means in a crowded theater. So when we come to the conclusion, whatever conclusion we have, the author is to blame for that. You see, this is basic common sense logic over here. You yell fire in a crowded theater, don't give me this crap, but that's not what I meant. That's not what the way interpretation. Let's look at the Greek wording of my statement, fire in a crowded, what I meant by fire. No, we don't care what you meant about Greek. We don't care about what you mean. Oh, let's go to the aliens. You know, when you were lighting a lighter, that's really, The general public understands what fire means in a crowded theater. So what you are trying to do, you are trying to justify yelling fire you're trying to justify yelling slavery in a crowded theater. So now that we see that, okay, the blame goes to the Bible for not writing clear instructions. Let's look at these instructions now. And let's look and see, well, how is the general public supposed to interpret or understand these verses now? Because that's really where my argument here. The Bible is to blame, irregardless of what you think the Bible really meant to say. The Bible says over here, anyone who beats, but talking about beating a slave and that they die, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two. So you can beat him to death if he recovers after a day or two. So now here's my question for you. I have 6 commentaries here, all stating that, yes, the loss of the slave was enough punishment for the master if he's beaten to death. So if 6 Bible scholars can come to this conclusion, then how can you blame the general public for coming to that same conclusion? That's my question for you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so there's a few things I want to address. Firstly, just because someone does something evil or bad or immoral in the name of something doesn't make the source bad. That is a genetic fallacy. You keep on committing the same fallacy over and over. You're regurgitating it and returning to it over and over and over. So I don't know if this is probably that, there's some type of block there, mental block. You just don't see that is a fallacious argumentation. But now to address Exodus 21. If you understand Hebrew law against casuistic law does not come in isolated passages. They come in clusters of passages. So when we look at 21:20, yes, it says, if a master beat a slave and they die, they shall be punished. But then if they don't die, they will 2 or 3 days of waiting time, and they shall be, I think it was like the slave's money or something there. But it doesn't stop there though, because these are clusters of passages. So Here's the what we call a chiastic structure in the Hebrew. This was what scholars say. You're going to have to address the scholarship for your points to have any validity to it. So what happens in like a chiastic structure, if not the death penalty, then it's lex talionis. If not the lex talionis, then it's the death penalty. So we see in Exodus 21:20, it's the death penalty, but in verse 21, it's not the death penalty, so lex talionis would follow. Well, what does, okay, if it's lex talionis, then what was the penalty then? Well, it tells you in verses 25 through 26. It says, even if an eye or a tooth, and this is like Christopher Rice says, no, this is indicative of any unwarranted assault. So these are more like idioms, metaphors of universal, like unwarranted assault or any type of.
I think there's 2 minutes there, Thomas. Okay.
I was going to. Can I finish? Because I mean,
no,
I'll let you.
No, we're taking
Okay.
2 minutes back and forth. So let me just address that. Okay. So you came up with this, that the reason why is, the whole thing, that the real understanding of the Bible is there's a law, law isolate, clusters, and you got to address the scholarship. No, my argument is, if you give this verse to the general public, how are they going to understand this thing? Now, the Bible very clearly states over here, I will read it one more time, about beating a slave to death, but they are the slave master, for they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two. The argument which is destroying you right here in front of everybody, you need to show that these are good, clear instructions, that the person living in the 18th century can follow, and that's going to show that you cannot beat a slave or do anything. You're not able to do that. You're going into this cluster baloney. You're going to address the scholarship. 18th century Christian. This is not something the common man can do. Is going to do that. I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. So what is really destroying you? Not only is it that the argument now is being sustained, the Bible doesn't provide clear instructions for a person to follow that's going to lead him out of slavery. That's simply a clear argument, which is, I think, has been substantiated today. You're saying this is idiom and metaphors. That's fine. You can have your own interpretation, but I think that's been all addressed here. So the text is unmistakable, that it clearly gives permission to beat him. Not only that, but to beat him to death so long as he survives a day or two. So what is really missing in the Bible is what we found Prophet Muhammad said: you will burn in hell if you beat a slave. So here we can see that Islam provides a morally superior teaching. And that's my 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
So what you're doing is trying to push exclusivity, your own interpretation. So you're refuting yourself. It's self-refuting. Why is your interpretation exclusive and not anyone else's? And like, you're trying to weaponize again people's ignorance of the understanding of the Bible. Well, this is why we need scholars that understand how Hebrew words work, Hebrew sentences. And before I got cut off, what I was going to say, finishing, well, since the death penalty was not enforced in Exodus 21 or 21:21, then lex talionis follows. We read in Exodus 21:26 and 27 that they would be released out of their obligation. But not only that, it says eye for an eye, bruise for a bruise, tooth for a tooth, and death or life for life. So they understood if there was any brutality, any type of physical harm to the servant, they could fight back even, and they would be released out of their obligation. The reason why the 2 or 3 days was there is because it would be a judicial process that they would go through to see if they had evidence that there was physical abuse by the master, because the glaring loophole is they could get out of their contractual obligation by making something up and fraud their master. Wasn't because they were like in some sick bed or something. I know people have sprained their ankles when they're out for a month. And if you're brutalized to 1 inch of your death, it's going to be longer than 2 or 3 days. Get your head out of your rear end, Nadir. And I'll end right there.
Well, you stated here that they understood that if there's any kind of brutality, they can fight back. Now, we know that if you read the Bible, you open it up, there is no explicit verse, whether the Old Testament or New Testament, which states that If you see any brutality, you slaves can fight back. I mean, does it explicitly say word for word like that in the Bible? And I will give you 10 seconds of my time to go ahead and answer that question. I understand how you're deriving that understanding. I understand how you are contriving that understanding. And this is a real scholarly interpretation of the Bible. I understand all that, where you're getting it from. But my question tonight, does it, the Bible, if you pick up the Bible and you look and does it explicitly say word for word that if you see any brutality, you can fight back? Do you just take 10 seconds of my time to answer that?
Why would it? It's you're assuming that it should.
Okay, good.
Why?
Let me take my time back. Okay, that's clear.
It's
The answer is
irrelevant.
no.
It's a stupid. It's a
Okay,
stupid
so
request.
the argument which I'm presenting here is you see, I think the argument which is, quite frankly, which is destroying you, is the common man, the general public. When you give this book to the common public, sorry, they're not going to come to these understandings that you are. That is why your understanding is a very new understanding. You can't go back to the 15th century and show this is the way people understood the Bible. You can't do that, because this is all a very new reinterpretation of the Bible, and that's fine. You can reinterpret it. So now let's go to another. We're going to go jump to the New Testament and see another horrific passage in the Bible, and this is once again reaffirming, re-endorsing the fact that you can beat your slave. The Bible says over here inside First Peter, and my time's almost up. First Peter chapter 2, verse 18. It says, "Be submissive to your masters with all fear, but also to the harsh ones, for it is commendable." Because something goes on over here. I will read again, but my time's up. But basically, the text says that it is good you suffer and take the beating from him. God is happy. Go ahead, please.
Yes, and you don't understand the employer and employee relationship. This is the way it's always understood. Colossians 4:1 destroys your understanding of the text. And here's what it says: Masters, practice equality and justice with your servants, and be aware that you also have a master in heaven. So they understood, being a servant to Christ, then therefore we should return the Jesus or the Christ-like behavior to your human servants. Read Colossians 4:1. Thank you. That's it. Debunked.
Now, you've actually did bring up a good point. One good thing about the New Testament, it definitely endorses a kindly, loving relationship between the slave master and the slave. That's a good point, and I like that. But where you are failing now, the Bible not only also fully endorses the harsh slave master. Okay, that's not the ideal, but it definitely endorses beating him, and God is happy that you got that beating from the slave. From the slave master. So yes, both are correct. So if you want to show that the Bible, actually the ideal is a kind, loving type of relationship between the slave master, and that's true. I will agree with that. But it fully endorses both forms of slavery. So let me read the verse here. It's a horrific verse. It says, "Servants, be submissive with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, which is the ideal, but to the harsh. For it is commendable if, because of the conscience towards God, one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it if you are beaten for your faults? You take it patiently. You are beaten for your fault. What credit is it? But when you do good and suffer, you take it patiently. This is commendable before God." So that is where the problem is. So once again, just like we see in the Old Testament, the Bible is reinforcing this idea that the slave master has a right to beat you. And when you patiently take this beating, God is happy. He's happy. Now, to prevent any kind of reinterpretation spin, I have just presented to you 12 commentaries on the Bible. Okay, these are 12 commentaries right here on the Bible. I actually have more, but what what these commentaries are basically saying, or actually my time is up, so it doesn't matter. So what I'm trying to show is that any kind of reinterpretation spin, my time is up. Go ahead, please. It's your turn.
Right. So again, you're just assuming like there's a hard line position or interpretation that it should be interpreted the way that you see it. But again, all you have to do is just read Luke 12:47 through 48. Whenever he talks about beating or stripes, he means it in a disciple way, like in a spiritual way, like how it says that God, when God loves you, He will chastise you. It's a spiritual chastisement. You don't see that because you have this hardline understanding of it, and your ignorance cannot be used as a weapon against it. And so this is your whole strategy today was trying to weaponize people's ignorance, and it just shows you how foolish your argumentation really is. And I think that you're inept and bankrupt of really any understanding of ancient Near East scholarship, hermeneutics, exegesis, interpretational value. I think that you're pretty poor at that, but I do, I recommend that you actually get into objective research and scholarship on this matter. But I'll end it there.
Okay, yeah, and I think because I think the you are not able to address the central argument here is how is it when you give a verse like this to the general public, are they really going to come to this beautiful interpretation you presented that the beating is in a spiritual way? This is just a spiritual beating. Is the general public really going to come to that conclusion? I will prove you wrong. I have 12 commentaries of the Bible I presented to you. Nowhere in those 12 commentaries does it say anything that the beating was just a spiritual beating. Okay? You are right in the sense that I am ignoring the hermeneutics and the scholarly opinions, and I'm doing that for two reasons. Number one, because it's a Johnny come lately. What do I mean by that? Now that slavery is condemned by society, now this hermeneutics and scholarly opinions are coming. Where was it in the 18th century? Where was it in the 17th century? It didn't exist. That is because the plain reading of the Bible doesn't give you this stuff. And also because my argument is on the general public. When you give this verse to the general public, how are they going to understand this? They're going to take out a whip and you understand me, boy? The Lord said that I have the right to whip you. Whoosh, whoosh. That's the way I understand it. That's the way if you give it to any layman, that's the way they're going to understand it. If you look at the early days, everybody understood this passage to be this way. Your interpretation, hermeneutics, is a Johnny come lately because of the embarrassment. So the argument here, the Bible is at fault. Irregardless of whether you think this is a true interpretation of the Bible or not, that's irrelevant. The Bible is at fault for not writing good enough instructions for the people to follow, to come to the conclusion that these are spiritual beatings, to come to the conclusion that this is just, if you see brutality, you can fight back, to come to the conclusion with all these gorgeous interpretations you're presenting to us. Sorry, the general public will not. You read the Bible, you're not going to come to those conclusions. Go ahead.
Yeah, so first of all, the understanding of chastisement has been essential a theme throughout the whole Bible. So that is just blatantly false. I don't think you know what the hell you're talking about in regards to the chastisement. God always chastises those who He loves, and maybe He'll use language like beating and stripes. That's just to convey that, hey, God is going to put us, right with Him. Like He's going to. Like when you're a child, like your parents are going to put their finger in your face to put the fear of God in you. I don't mean like hitting, actually beating, but I mean they're going to try to put some fear into you, and that's what God does. Like He tries to institute some godliness into us, and sometimes that comes in different ways and forms throughout our life. But and also like you're just assuming all these things, like, oh, because the way I look at it, therefore are you saying that is this like some type of prescriptive value? Are you trying to impose like a moral ought that people ought to look at the Bible the way I do, therefore it's wrong? I mean, you're just assuming. It's begging the question. That's all you're doing is begging the question. This is why we need scholarship. People who understand, their expertise is in the language and the syntax, the context, all the different understandings that go into putting the interpretation of a text. And again, like tonight, this is just embarrassing for you. I think this was pretty bad. But I think now is my questioning and answering time, if I believe her, if that's true. I think so anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a slam dunk in the sense that you are being whipped actually. With one argument, the general public are just not going to come to the when you read this passage that is talking about a spiritual beating. And I think, why don't you just be honest with us today and just admit for us tonight that when you read the Bible and it talks inside this passage, 1 Peter chapter 2, 18-24, it says you have to be submissive to the harsh master. And because it is commendable that you take a beating from him and you take it patiently, God is happy. Why don't you just be honest with us and admit, if you read the Bible, if the general public reads the Bible, they're not going to come to the conclusion that this is referring to a spiritual beating only, not a physical one. Can you at least take 10 seconds of my time and admit that?
It's chastisement. Yes, we're supposed to take chastisement just as God has given us chastisement. It's that simple. And because you don't like it, doesn't make it.
That's not the question I asked you. I'm talking about spiritual beating. You're not going to come to that conclusion. Okay, there's nothing in the Bible that
I said chastisement. Yeah. That's what I said. Okay. Chastisement.
So the general public, they are to blame because when the instruction said chastisement, they're supposed to understand this is can only refer to a spiritual beating. Is that what you're telling us tonight?
Yeah, read Luke. I gave you a reference. So it's Luke 12:47 through 48. It's right there in the Bible. Like, can I not use the Bible to destroy your false accusations?
You can. Where does it? What I want you to do is explicitly show me that a verse in the Bible which says the beating is only a spiritual beating and not a real physical one. But I wanted to show explicitly, not an interpretation, not inferred. I want it explicitly written like that. Do you have anything like that to share for us today?
So this is like the argument. So Jesus, because he doesn't say, I am God, worship me, therefore Jesus was not God. Is that the same line of argumentation that you're trying to employ here?
No. The line of argumentation I'm trying to employ here is, does the Bible prevent clear instructions for the common person to come to these type of conclusions you are presenting to us, that the beating in the Bible is only spiritual beating? Does it explicitly say that so that we could put the blame on the slave master or the Christians for not following those clear instructions?
So because it doesn't suit the way that you want to read it, therefore it's not true.
We need explicit
statements. That is terrible argumentation, man. Like science, you think like when we go into science rooms, do they care like if you don't understand the proper methodologies of understanding things, if it goes over your head, if it's hard or complicated? No. Science moves forward. And I'm giving science as an example to show you how ridiculous this argumentation really is. But I have some questions for you now. So, when it's in the Quran, it says that there were numerous references to slaves and slavery, and it even says Muhammad called blacks raisin heads. But I want you to specifically address Quran 2:178, Quran 1675, and Quran 30:28. Go ahead.
So thank you for pretty much handing me this debate. What destroys Christianity? No, it's not so much that as you have accepted tonight, that if you look in the Bible, the things you are talking about a spiritual beating, fight back for brutality. Sorry, this stuff just doesn't exist in the Bible. You will not find it. Muhammad explicitly condemned any kind of brutality when it came to slavery. For example, let me share my desktop real quick here, because when you talk about Islam and slavery, believe me, that's going to be the victory lap. Prophet Muhammad made it very clear that if you beat a slave, you are going to burn in hell. But not only that, but the Prophet also said that the slave is going to eat the same food as a slave master. So if the slave master is eating lamb, lobster, whatever, or lamb chops, whatever it is, guess what your slave is eating? He's eating lamb. He's going to be eating lobster. He's going to be eating lamb chops. If the slave will dress the same way the slave master dresses. So if the slave master is dressed in Giorgio Armani, guess what the slave is doing? He's going to be wearing Giorgio Armani. So just showing us, wait a second, Islam talks about slavery as well. Look at how in Islam it explicitly gives out laws and rules to why? Because if you just go to people and say, okay, have slaves, people are going to impose their understanding of what slavery is. So Islam redefines what slavery is, and it presented very good rules for that, which you don't find in the Bible. Go ahead.
Yeah, so here's Quran 178. It says, "O you who believe, prescribe for you as retaliation in cases of deliberate unjust killing freeman or free man, slave for slave, female for female." So tell me how that is an explicit chattel slavery.
Oh, well, it's not explicit chattel slavery, because if you look at slavery as taught in the Quran and Hadith, you will find it's a very different version of slavery. Let me show you the explicit.
Oh, but I don't
Hold on.
see it that way though. I want it to be.
Okay.
I want to
May I?
specifically to say the way that I want to see it. I want to say no, that there's no a specific chattel slavery. I wanted to say it that, or else then your interpretation is just faulty and wrong.
Thank you. Very good point. Islam should explicitly show that it's not referring to chattel slavery. I think that's a very valid argument. That was my argument all tonight, so I should be consistent with what I am saying. So here we go. Here are the explicit passages. Whoops, let me get to where my explicit passages here. Okay, here we go. Here's the first one. The first one. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that for the person who has a slave girl, if he teaches her, educates her well, and frees her, and then marries her, he's going to get a double reward. Now, this is astonishing, because that's not even a privilege for the free people. Even for the free people, they don't get an education. But guess what? Through slavery, you're going to get an education. So that is a very miraculous statement right there. And so let me go to another one. We already went over that if you beat a slave, you're going to burn in hell. These are all explicit passages written over here. Here's another one. It says that he's basically slapped this one person on the screen. He slapped her slave. Muhammad, when you said you're going to set her free for merely slapping her. Here's another one. A slave girl could take the hand of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and take her wherever she desired, meaning that if there's any kind of abuse, any kind of problems, she's
But
got
you're
that
just
one-on-one
reinterpreting
interaction.
it for us. I don't read the
Okay.
passage that way. And
Can you see the screen? Can you see the
Yeah,
screen?
I see
Okay,
that,
okay.
but you're just reinterpreting it the way that
Okay,
you want it to be
let's
read.
read.
I
Let's
mean,
read
you have a
text.
double standard, Nadir.
Let us.
You're not holding the same
Good
standard.
point.
Oh, I can't interpret the way the Bible with scholars, but oh, you can though, right, Nadir?
Nope.
Because
Good point.
you
Let's
get
not
that
reinterpret.
privilege.
Good.
Yeah.
Let's not reinterpret. Let's read the text verbatim. Now I will read over here. He who has a brother
That's not
under
the
him.
verse I brought up. Let's talk about the verse I brought up.
Well, so when we talk, when we go, do you know what the hadith is? The hadith is a history, the sayings and deeds of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we also follow the Quran, and we follow something called the hadith. So the laws pertaining to slavery is all found in hadith. But I do like where you're going with this. Let's not go with scholars' apologetic interpretations, because that could all be, and I held you to that standard. So let me just read word for word where what Islam teaches here. He who has a brother under him, and if you see me doing any interpretation, stop me, interrupt me. He who has a brother under him should feed him whatever he eats and dress him with whatever he wears. Do not burden them, assign burden tasks to them beyond their capacity. And if you burden them, you then help them. We read the one about here's another passage. You should not overburden them and with what they cannot bear. And if you do so, help them.
What does overburden mean? Can you go into that? What is that? Like, can you give some more background on that?
Basically, it's talking about, like burdening him, where it's giving him a lot of hard work, which is really difficult for him to handle. But my point here is this essentially destroys Christianity, because now the question which you need to answer is how do you explain an alleged false prophet giving explicit commands showing that we do not practice chattel slavery, for example, beating a slave, he's going to burn in hell. How do you explain that Muhammad, an alleged false prophet, can provide better laws than the Lord and Savior himself?
I kind of want to circle back around that overburden. So what is
Mhm.
regular burden then? So they understood you can't overburden them. So what is the regular burden?
So let's go back to I'll show you a hadith which sort of talks about this burden thing, okay? So from the following hadith, it talked about the slave Zayd. Let me find it for you real quick over here if I can. Um, oh, I'm on the wrong. Okay, so I'm actually missing one passage. It's about the testimony of Zayd. Oh, here we go. This is what it means to have a slave and how you and what the amount of burden here. Okay, here's talking here. The slave says, "I served the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for 10 years. He never said oof. He never blamed me by saying, why did you do so and so? Why did you not do that? And the messenger of Allah had the best character among all of the people and never touched silk, cause, and then it goes on. And so the most important point here, he never even said oof to his slave. My point to you here is if an alleged false prophet can produce wonderful explicit teachings like this about slavery, why is it that the Bible cannot do so? And I think when
It
you
seems like
ask that question,
speculation, your point. You're just trying to give me the runaround on all this. And like you committed the very same things that
Mhm,
you accused me of. I just think to make you have a double standard tonight. And I
mhm.
hope people see that. So
Okay, so I was just quoting things explicitly from the passage, but I think where the problem, I mean, you have to accept that if you read the Bible, you will not find any verse in the Bible which says something like, "If you beat a slave, you're gonna burn in hell." You are not gonna find that in the Bible. Can you accept that?
no, I'm not going to accept that because it says you shall love the foreigner as yourself, and to not do that would be a offense to hell. So I
So
completely
that is an
disagree.
interpretation, but I'm talking about an explicit passage, word for word.
You mean the exact verbiage the way that you want it to be said, or
It
else
could
it's
be
not
in any
true?
clear manner, like if you beat a slave, you
How is that
will
not
something or
clear?
another.
You're just
Yeah.
being arbitrary
So
right
look,
now. I
what
just
you
think it's
presented
stupid.
is your understanding of a particular Bible verse. See, let me explain something to you. Don't think that the audience is so naive and dumb that they don't know the difference between what is explicitly written versus an interpretation. There's a difference between the two. So I'm asking you for explicit passages in the Bible which says that if you beat a slave, etc., 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 either you burn in hell, you're out of sync with God,
Yeah,
or
yeah, I
something
do.
like that.
Yeah,
Is there an explicit passage
yeah,
like that?
I do. Jeremiah 7:6.
Okay, read it. And no interpretations.
Yeah, I mean, I'll bring it up on the screen here. I'm trying to get the. I'll
Yeah.
share the.
Okay. And I will warn you, we know the difference between an interpretation and what is explicitly written. So
Like
don't think we're
you,
ignorant like that,
I mean,
okay?
why are you the arbiter of what's supposed to be accepted or not? Like, I think
Okay,
that's so
well let's
stupid.
see the explicit passages that beating a
All right,
slave, that's it, you're done. Let's see that.
there we go. I'll just read from the ESV. If you don't oppress the sojourner, the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you don't go not after the other gods to your own harm. So it shows here that slavery was tantamount to murder. So
Okay.
murder is punishable by death. Therefore, we can see that yes, murder and slavery are in the same level. There you go.
Tom, you are insulting our intelligence at this point. Okay, first of all, you're now reinterpreting sojourner to mean slaves, and then you are putting another interpretation spin that this is somehow talking about slavery.
It
Okay,
doesn't say
so look,
Israelite though,
look,
does it? So yeah, you
Thomas,
kind of defeated
Tom, we're
yourself.
no one. I'm going to tell you something. Nobody listening to this is going to buy that. Okay, everybody knows what I'm asking for. Okay,
Many have, yeah. So I
we
think
know
you're
the
wrong about
difference
that.
between an interpretation and what is explicitly written in the Bible. Now, I did give you the permission to interrupt me at any time when I was speaking to if I was reinterpreting or using an opinion of a scholar when I was going through the explicit passages in Islam which talks about slavery. And Allah Akbar, you did not interrupt me, you did not stop me. We were reading along and you did have some questions, and I like that. So this is what, where I think the problem comes in. The Bible actually said that gave the permission to that it stated very clearly that a slave can be beaten. It said that they should patiently with go through that beating, and God would be happy. And you never showed anywhere in the Bible which explicitly stated this is only talking about a spiritual beating. And I'm going to tell you something, nobody listening to this is going to buy that, Tom, and you know that. You
The
know that you are
principle,
trying to.
I mean,
Tom, let me ask you
very
this
minimal.
question.
All
Do you
right, and
expect the
that's
audience?
40
He's
minutes.
just
If you guys have any
overtalking. Okay.
statements, statements.
My question for you is, do you really expect the audience
You're just running
listening
the
to
time
this
out, man. Let me
show?
talk.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Calm down.
So, the principle is in the Bible, because Jesus says, if the least of these things you did to neglect someone else, you did it to me. So if you beat someone, you're beating Christ. This is in Matthew 25, 40 through 45. We don't have the exact wordage like what you expect, but I think that's just shifting the goalpost at that point. But the principle is always in the Bible, dude. If you beat a servant or a slave, then you're beating an image bearer of God. And this is why Job says, will I not be judged in the day that who I oppress and beat, or something like that, then I will be judged.
Hi, is this thing on? I don't think we're hooked up.
I can hear you. I can
You're
hear
good.
you.
You're good.
Hello.
Yeah, you guys are good.
Yeah. But Tom, I think you are not really.
Hi, we are
understanding
out
it.
of time.
Oh, okay.
Wait, does anybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I
I feel like I'm in
You're
class
coming in
right
good.
now.
Coming in good.
Students are not listening to me. All right, my students are not listening to the teacher. Okay, we are currently out of time. We'll allow 5 minutes. So I believe since Nadir went first, Praise can go first for his closing remarks for 5 minutes now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So first of all, I appreciate our host for setting this up, and I appreciate Nadir for engaging with me tonight or evening. So beyond that, though, I think Nadir came to this debate with a faulty strategy. And what he tried to do is use the ignorance of other people's interpretations and how they understood things, so somehow it would be like it bears something on the Bible itself. That is a genetic fallacy. And also it's very ethnocentric, and it's a presences fallacy to impose some type of understanding the way that you want it to be understood, and somehow that diminishes the Bible. No, that's a very ethnocentrist. And I think you should respect other people's faiths more than that, because I didn't even attack. I mean, you brought up the Quran, so I thought I would return back, but I didn't even really attack any of your stuff. I didn't say, because Muhammad and these people are, like, I didn't even attack. I thought that was beneath you to do that. But I did show tonight, I did give explanations for these supposed go-to passages for pro-slave, or the people that believe that we're slavery in the Bible, like Exodus 21. We went through that, and I explained, like, yes, that's the idea that if not death penalty, then obviously lex talionis. And the lex talionis, in those passages I showed that they would be released out of their contract. And yes, the idea of bruise for a bruise, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, they understood they could fight back for themselves, but the problem was that they could make it up, and that's why they had to deliberate, and a judge through a judicial system for 2 or 3 days to find out. They had 2 or 3 witnesses to verify their claim. So that's all. It's more judicial language there. So I destroyed that. I showed that the Lord prescribed at least the Hebrews understand to love their foreigners as themselves. To not oppress them means to not slave them. The word oppress is very specific in the Hebrew. And I do, I really do hope that Nadir kind of gets into more Hebrew scholarship and other different types of commentaries maybe, and more outside of his purview that he's comfortable with, because if he's inside working within his own viewpoint, then it's just an echo chamber at that point. But anyway, I like Nadir. I think he's a real charismatic guy. I have nothing against him, so peace and respect to you, Nadir, and I hope the best for you. Thank you so much. I'll end my time there.
Okay, so I think the point was made in tonight's debate. If you give the Bible to the general public, Are they really going to come to these type of interpretation spins that Thomas was giving us tonight? No, come on, ridiculous. Love the foreigners. Don't oppress them. This is all condemning slavery. A beautiful interpretation of it. I like it. I love it. But that's not the people reading the Bible will not come to that conclusion. Okay? What Thomas is doing here, he's trying to, maybe he thinks we're naive that we don't know the difference between what is explicitly written in the Bible versus an interpretation spin. If you go into the Bible and look for explicit verses for all the wonderful things he has said tonight, will you really find it? The beating is a spiritual beating. It's only spiritual. Jesus loves you, and so would you beat? All those beautiful interpretations. Will you really find it in the Bible? No, of course not. It's not there. Anybody can reinterpret the text to make it to mean what they want it to mean, and that's what he did tonight. And I pressed him. I said, okay, no, dude, show me where it explicitly says these wonderful things that you're saying here, dude. And he wasn't able to do. He began reinterpreting it, trying to like we don't know what he's doing here. No, we know what you're doing. Okay, where does it explicitly say that the foreigners are slaves? And therefore, when you oppress a foreigner, you're oppressing a slave. Where does it explicitly say these things in the Bible? You see, the Bible is to blame for if we were to, go along with a canard here. We were to just go along with what you're saying here tonight. The Bible is to blame for the horrific chattel slavery which we have seen taking place. Why? It simply didn't provide clear instructions to let people know that the slavery in the Bible is talking about, all the wonderful things which Thomas was presenting us tonight. It's just not there. The white man actually did a very good job. If you look at it, very good job of following the instructions which were given to him. He is not to blame. If we are to accept what you are saying, that the real interpretation of the Bible means something else, if we were to accept that, the white man's not to blame. It's the Bible which is to blame for not providing clear instructions. But the death blow to Thomas and to the Bible is Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he did provide clear instructions to show that Muslims do not practice chattel slavery. If you beat a slave, you're gonna burn in hell. And we saw so many other passages like that. Stuff like, oh, but the slave can fight back. Sorry, that stuff is not in the Bible. So the deception which I think you are trying to present to us tonight, you are trying to yell fire in a crowded theater. That's not going to work. You try to yell fire in a crowded theater, say, but let's go to the hermeneutics of what I meant. Let's go to the scholarly consensus, and let's go to this of what. That's not going to work. Why? Because when you yell fire in a crowded theater, this is the way the general public understands it. Okay, just like yelling slavery in a crowded theater is not going to work. Okay, here's what we really meant. Now let's go to the hermeneutics of what I meant by slavery. Let's go to the hermeneutics of what I meant by beat a slave, and if you will submit to the harsh slave master, and how good is it that when you get a beating from him, God is happy. This is what the Bible teaches. Let's go to the hermeneutics. The general public is not going to by that. This is always referring to a spiritual beating. This is not going to happen. So I think where he was defeated at every point in tonight's debate is, okay, fine, Tom, you have your interpretation and doing all this hermeneutic stuff, but the general public is not going to come to this conclusion. When the plain reading of the text is not going to give us your understanding. So I think that's where this debate was really decided right there. And that is why the Bible is to blame for chattel slavery, and why slavery disproves Christianity as a false religion. Because when you open up the door for beating a slave, you also open up the door for his horrific torture. And no true book of God can ever do that. Thanks.
All right, drop them back. All right, so now we are going to move into question and answer. All right, drop them back. And, okay, so first one is from Jill, who Nadir debated last time.
Oh yeah.
What did it mean in ancient Hebrew culture to be called and he slave property? Interpret that how you will.
Yeah. So you are. See, Jill is also another guy who's like he's dragging his feet. He was actually supposed to debate tonight, but we see that there is a debate-winning argument here, which is destroying Jill, and especially this question. We don't care, Jill. The question is, what does there was a verse in the Bible which says that you can beat a slave to death, and when you beat him, man, that opens up the door for torture for him. And it said not only that, but it's stated over there in the Bible that not that if so long as he survives a day or two, there is no punishment for the slave master. That cannot be reinterpreted. Okay, how is a common man, how is the general public going to understand that? I provided 6 commentaries of the Bible showing that no punishment is to be given to the slave master if he beats his slave to death, because the loss of his property was enough. Okay, so that's where I think you are being defeated here. So when you say, okay, well, what did it mean, Hebrew culture, that it called a slave property? I can answer that with a counter question. Where does it say explicitly in the Bible that the slavery is only voluntary? Where does it explicitly state that in the Bible? Because my argument against is that the Bible did not provide clear instructions for the slave master to tell him, dude, this is all only referring to voluntary slavery. We are going to impose our understanding onto the Bible rightfully. Okay. But let's just go along with it. Let's just say that I'm wrong, that we are making the mistake. The whole society is making a mistake that we are imposing our interpretation or our understanding what slavery is onto the Bible. Once
I'd
again,
like
the
to
Bible...
have something to say about this too.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so the syntactical structure already says that they have freedom. It's already built within the text itself. It's called casuistic law. It's conditional laws. And the fact that it is conditional means that it's volitional. So he doesn't understand that, but we don't need to care about that because I would be reinterpreting it. But the whole point of hermeneutics is so it doesn't become arbitrary. It becomes at least up to a body of experts that know what they're doing, and it makes it more objective rather than subjective. But I don't think Nadir understands that. But yeah, go ahead.
So Jill can answer that question. Show me an explicit passage in the Bible which says slavery is only voluntary. Go ahead.
It's in the structure itself, the syntactical structure. Yeah, Hebrew. Oh, you don't like the Hebrew language now? You a bigot of the Hebrew language?
Yeah. You should just admit it doesn't explicitly state that, okay?
So like the English language has subjunctives. You would agree, right?
Look, you have many commentaries which you could have appealed to show that the slavery
you're just making yourself a fool right now. You're making fun of a language. That is despicable.
Produce commentaries then, okay? Can you show me a commentary?
I just did. I'm giving you. Yeah, we want commentaries. I was giving you several tonight in my opening.
Well, no, where it says that the slavery of the Bible is only voluntary. Can you show me that?
Yeah, casuistic law. Yeah.
Share your desktop and show me a reputable source. Go ahead.
Yes, I will. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
But we can get to the next question. I pull it up.
Next question. Let's see here.
Okay.
Next question. Ask Nadir if he's willing to debate me, and we'll take the shahada.
Ask Nadir if he's.
Yes, of course. I would love to do that. You now heard my arguments, which you now need to address. And as I said it, the slavery completely destroys the Bible because, it is responsible for the horrific catastrophe which took place. The point which I wanted to make, we don't, the whole issue tonight, whether it's right or wrong for us to impose our understanding onto the Bible. This is especially for Jill, who asked that, who tried to raise us. Let's say it's wrong. Let's say we are wrong. Well, guess what? It's going to happen. It's going to happen whether it's right or wrong. And because it's going to happen, the Bible has a responsibility for providing clear instructions, explicitly written, that this is not referring to chattel slavery. This can never refer to the type of torture and beating of slaves. It is still the Bible's responsibility, because we are going to impose our understanding onto the Bible, right or wrong. This is what destroys the whole case for Christianity. So anyway, the answer to the question is yes. Go ahead.
Praise, did you have any response?
Oh, with the shahada, I'm not even sure what that is, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay. Can you ask Nadir why Allah didn't tell the Muslims not to sell Africans to the Europeans as slaves?
Okay, so the question is, can you ask Nadir why Allah didn't tell the Muslims not to sell Africans to the Europeans as slave? Well, so what actually took place inside the Islamic Empire was criminal activity. This was the activity of pirates. Okay, the pirates. The difference is this: when you look at what the Christians did in the 18th century, they were saying, we are doing this because this is what the Bible teaches us to do. But when the pirates did their slavery, they never made that claim. So you really can't compare the two. Now, slavery was practiced in Islamic law, but guess what? You will find that they practice what you're going to find is that in Islamic law, I talked about that the children of the slaves all have to be set free, and it also talked about a free man cannot enter into slave. That's all in Islamic law. So when you look at slavery, which was practiced actually after the death of Muhammad, that's actually a winning point for Islam, because you will see many of the examples of the explicit teachings of Islam found practiced by these early Muslims. And I think one of the biggest evidences for that is look at the Middle East, look at the Islamic world compared to the Christian world. Where are the ghettos? Where are all of the poor neighborhoods filled with the descendants of those slaves? Where is that in the Islamic world? Where is that in Saudi Arabia? You will not find it. Why? Because they followed the Islamic system. But unfortunately, the Western world followed the biblical way, and we now see the result, the catastrophe, which has left. In every American city, you will find ghettos filled with the descendants of the slaves. So this is a terrible legacy which was left behind, but you will not find that in the Islamic world. Why? Because there is a distinct difference between the Quran and the Bible on slavery.
And Praise, any response?
Yeah, I mean, like if we look at the history, the Islam is you can easily impugn them as far as conducting slavery. Why doesn't, like, he brought up about the antebellum slavery? Let's look at the slavery that the Islamists did. And like, what is his justification for that? Obviously, he doesn't have one. So he, even based on his own standard, he refuted his own argumentation tonight. So thank you so much, Nadir.
All right, and now we are entering the scoring portion of the show.
Yeah.
And
Hooray.
as usual, it does not affect the scores. And we try to not let our biases affect it either. Did you want to go first?
Sure, I can go first. All right, so that was definitely a very close debate, and they could have seen better performances from both competitors, and I saw a much better performance from PraiseIam before. Talk about how we could have basically improved this. So, Nadir, I have to say that I feel like the majority of your arguments were extremely, because the actual motion that we were debating was, does the Bible condone slavery, right? Like, does the Bible support slavery? And focusing rather on the effects and rather instead of the actual text. Your main argument was, if somebody shouts fire in a movie, matter what they were intending. It may or may not matter, but for the purposes of this debate, the motion was what the Bible is actually supporting. However, this is actually an ad populum or bandwagon fallacy by your saying that the Bible actually matters based on what it actually says. That being said, it would have been great if you connected that a little bit more. If you actually push that point a little bit further, it could have been extremely everybody interpreting it this way. Why is everybody interpreting it this way? Because it actually is this way. All you had to do to really land that point and drive it home was to show our right to believe that it is. That being said, I do feel like in the middle of the debate, I started to become more onto your side, which on the actual quotes. In particular, I was extremely impressed when you brought up the quote about how the submissive to their masters. And that point was really a turning point for me in terms of your performance. I'm looking for the actual thing in my notes. Snake, the actual quote.
Submissive to your master.
Yeah.
Even the brutal ones.
Exactly. And I felt like Praise didn't really have a strong side. But Nadir, I'm very confused as to why you spent so much time talking about Islam, because that was completely and utterly off topic. It should have been focused only on what the Bible says or doesn't say. We're not trying to compare the Bible to the Quran. So I do feel like you might have a bit by talking about something completely off topic. So that's kind of my feedback for Nadir in terms of only on your side up until the middle of the debate. I felt like you were doing a good job basically showing that the common quotes were out of context to them. And I think that you did a good job in terms of basically kind of questioning Nadir's logic. And however, I do feel like when Nadir brought up the fact that the Bible directly, you didn't really have a clear response. And I did find that your style in this debate could have been a bit belligerent. And sometimes just immediately defer to being verbally like rude instead of actually having any substance to what you were trying to say. You sort of did kind of do exactly what Nadir said in certain points, and giving us bring up the quote of a sojourner, and just kind of assuming that it applied to slavery, and sort of the fact that the Bible, that it's still slavery at the end of the day. And that's kind of where I feel like I understood more where Nadir was coming from. And that you were taking these, I feel like if Nadir was able to really drive that home, that, you're the one who's interpreting it differently, then I think that you were strongest when you brought up the fact that Nadir was quote unquote imposing people's ignorance on the Bible, and I would have liked to see that. I just would have liked to see just a little bit more content showing actual direct quotes, sort of like Nadir was able to do for the Quran of the Bible, as he was able to do that for the Quran, but I didn't feel like you actually had direct quotes from the Bible condemning it. So that's my feedback. Very hard. Snake's the good cop. So Snake, do you have any nicer feedback?
If I can ask, could you
Feedback.
send that to me in an email? Because you were
Um,
cutting up a little bit. Because I would like to hear that feedback. Would that be possible?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the feed on YouTube it has a couple pauses, but I'm hearing every word, so maybe that will be better. But yeah, we'll email you. I thought you had a stronger opener overall, and I did think you had more points of evidence. Yeah, I was with her. I thought overall Praise was winning, and as soon as Nadir started, you were kind of diversifying your evidence a little bit. I thought it became a little bit more. But at first, Praise, you were pretty good at keeping Nadir away from his main points, and your points, how the quotes are out of context, and so you're winning at that level. Of high level jargon and vocabulary that it makes you sound more not. Also, I didn't understand a lot of it, so I couldn't follow a lot of those points, like the so yeah. Did you want to do that later?
Yeah, my mom was watching the debate. My mom, and she said, "Stuff two are I can't understand either one of them." So too much jargon. Too much jargon.
Yeah, I would say, or like what it sounded like almonds to me. I forget the word, but Susanite, something or other. I didn't understand that as well. And subjunctive, like I remember that from Spanish class, but it's exactly what that was. I think you did do a good job explaining kind of the conditional. I think when you explain yourself a little bit more, it makes sense. But I think turning you use terms like master, and that kind of gives up the point, at least at face value. And that was kind of Nadir's main point, is like at face value, it says slaves. This is how it's going to be interpreted, which so you do have an uphill battle facing that face value. It was a good point. Masters, even the brutal ones. You said I think this is a good point when you say the Bible says to be fair to your slaves. It's still slaves, but I was kind of left wondering, like, so is there condemnation of if you're not fair to the slaves? Like, it's still fine because the slaves are still need to be submissive. But I would have liked to see that pushback from Nadir, actually. And virtual beatings, I thought Nadir actually had good pushback on that specifically. Quran, as well as Nadir's defense of the Quran, I thought was irrelevant. And yeah, I think I can't read my own handwriting on this final word. That was scrawled way too fast. So moving on to Nadir, I thought you had pretty much one or two main points, which were a lot more. More verses to back up your point. I know there's verses about about actually owning people as property. That would have come in pretty good for your case. I thought your main point was basically if you can beat your slave. And it's a good point. However, I just think you need more to hammer it down. Competitive and just in general, the more you can get in, at least you want more than one main point. The other thing, your main point was the general lay interpretation, which is a good argument, I think, which the true motion is, does the Bible support this, not how do people interpret the Bible? And I together in the end, where it's like the fire in the crowded theater, you're kind of saying this, the way it is interpreted is how it should be interpreted. But it's kind of a topic which is what the Bible actually does support. And so I think you need to engage more with the scholarly stuff, but seems unclear on the topic. And you did well to point out that there's very little to say against slavery. So yeah, and let's see, anything else? You mentioned it doesn't say you can fight back. Yeah, and I just like to your verses have more content that ways, and
Let's tell them who won, right?
yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you want to do the honor snake?
Okay, so we had Praise 5 average between our two scores, and Nadir with a 76. So that's a half a point of the difference.
Yeah. We won this debate, and we apologize for the choppy connection. Hopefully, it will be clear in the.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You guys kind of broke out.
It was a fun show, right?
Yeah, we didn't hear who won. I'm sorry.
Right.
All right. With a score of 75.5, we have PraiseIam, and with Nadir, we have 71. Once again, Nadir won the debate. Did they hear it?
All right. And it on the playback on YouTube, I checked that. So sorry about the connection.
You guys had some pretty good feedback. I think, Thomas, would you like to hear some of the feedback maybe in writing? Would you like that maybe?
Yeah, sure. That's fine. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. I'll look into that.
It was choppy.
Yeah, we'll do that. All right.
It was good.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Well, we appreciate you guys, and we'll have you guys.
Yeah. Hey, we had that one guy challenge me for debate in the comments
Bye.
section. So, okay, I'll talk to you.
Oh yeah, we'll get it all set up.
Why don't you leave your email for him so he can contact you?
Yahweh. Yeah, I told him to email me a couple times. Hopefully he does.
Okay.
Your way or Yahweh.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, guys. I gotta get going. I appreciate it.
Take care, guys. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Before you set up one with me, you know I'm going to be pissed off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Oh, are we still live?
Yeah. In
the
same room this time.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
Will never happen again.
Get a life. Bye.
Bye.